Before this video truly begins, let me make one thing very clear. We are not just watching another history video. We are on a long journey. A journey that began with the Indus Valley civilization, and step by step, video by video, will move forward through time until it reaches modern-day society. So as you watch this episode, think of it not as a replacement for Indus Valley, but as a continuation of that story. Because to understand how our world works today, we must understand why different civilizations took very different paths. Now, let's move west. The word Mesopotamia comes from Greek. It literally means the land between two rivers. Those rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates. At first glance, this sounds like the perfect place for civilization to begin. Rivers mean water. Water means agriculture. And agriculture means stability. But geography is not just about location, it is about behavior. And these rivers behaved very differently from the rivers of the Indus Valley. In Mesopotamia, there was no such certainty. The Tigris and Euphrates flooded without warning, sometimes too early, sometimes too late, sometimes with such force that entire fields and homes were destroyed. Here, nature was not reliable. And when humans cannot rely on nature, they try to control it. This single difference would shape Mesopotamian religion, politics, law, and even the way people thought about life itself. Mesopotamia was also an open land. Mesopotamia had no natural barriers, no Himalayas, no surrounding seas, no protection. Anyone could enter, anyone could invade. Security was never guaranteed. This is why Mesopotamian cities were built for defense, while Indus Valley cities were built for balance and order. One civilization trusted stability, the other prepared for danger. Around 9,000 years ago, people in this region began to farm. They domesticated wheat and barley. They learned how to dig canals to bring river water to their fields. But irrigation is not simple. Someone has to decide who gets water first, who waits, and who goes without. This is where power begins. The need to manage water created the need for authority. Slowly, small farming communities grew larger. Villages turned into towns. Towns turned into cities. By around 3500 BCE, the world's first true cities had appeared. One of the earliest and greatest of these was Uruk. Uruk was massive for its time. Tens of thousands of people lived there. It had markets, workshops, temples, and walls. This was not just a settlement. This was urban life. Now compare this again with the Indus Valley. Indus cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro appear remarkably uniform. Standardized bricks, straight roads, advanced drainage. Mesopotamian cities were different. Each city had its own ruler, its own god, its own identity. They were city-states and they competed with one another. Trade connected them, but rivalry defined them. Competition fueled innovation, but it also fueled conflict. When one city grew stronger, others felt threatened. War became common, not accidental, not rare, but expected. And because war was constant, leadership became stronger. Kings were no longer just administrators. They became protectors, judges, and representatives of the gods. At the center of every Mesopotamian city stood a massive structure, a ziggurat, a stepped tower rising toward the sky. This was not just architecture. It was belief made visible. Mesopotamians believed their gods lived above them and controlled everything below. Floods, droughts, disease, victory in war, defeat in war. Everything depended on divine will. Unlike the Indus Valley, where religious symbols suggest harmony with nature, Mesopotamian religion was built on fear and appeasement. The gods were powerful, but they were not kind. As cities expanded, managing them became increasingly complex. Grain had to be stored. Labor had to be organized. Trade had to be recorded. Human memory was no longer enough. And this is where one of the most important inventions in human history appears: writing. People began pressing symbols into wet clay. Simple marks at first, then more complex signs. This system is known as cuneiform. At the beginning, it was not used for stories or poetry. It was used for accounting. How much grain came in, how much went out, who owed what, who paid taxes. This tells us something important. Writing was not born from creativity. It was born from administration. The Indus Valley also had writing. Archaeologists know this, but we still cannot read it. Mesopotamia speaks clearly to us. Thousands of clay tablets survived, and through them we can see exactly how this civilization functioned, how power was organized, how resources were controlled, how society was managed. By this point, Mesopotamia was no longer just a region. It was a system. Cities, Kings, priests, soldiers, workers, a fully structured society. But with complexity came conflict, disputes over land, arguments over trade, crime within cities. Human society had reached a point where informal rules were no longer enough. Something new was required, something permanent, and that need would soon give birth to one of the most powerful ideas in human history: law. This is where Babylon enters the story. Around 1750 BCE, a Babylonian king named Hammurabi did something no ruler had done before. He ordered the laws of his kingdom to be carved into stone, not written on clay tablets kept in offices, not whispered by priests, but displayed publicly, so everyone could see them. The Code of Hammurabi was massive, hundreds of laws, covering daily life in detail: marriage, property, trade, theft, violence, labor. These were not moral guidelines, they were instructions, clear, specific, unavoidable. Punishments were harsh: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But justice was not equal. The punishment depended on social class. The same crime meant different consequences for a noble, a commoner, and a slave. But law alone does not control a society. People must believe that order is necessary. And in Mesopotamia, that belief came from religion. Mesopotamian religion reflected its environment. The gods were powerful, but unpredictable, just like the rivers. Floods were not blessings, they were punishments. Droughts were not accidents, they were warnings. Disease was not random, it was divine anger. The Mesopotamian gods were not protectors of humanity. Humans existed to serve the gods, to feed them through rituals, to appease them through obedience. Life was lived carefully, always trying to avoid divine wrath. Each city had its own chief god. Babylon had Marduk, other cities had their own patrons. Religion was not personal, it was political. Priests held power because they claimed to understand the god's will. Kings ruled because they claimed divine approval. Unlike later religions, Mesopotamia offered little comfort after death. The afterlife was dark, silent, joyless. There was no reward for good behavior. Only the hope that the gods would not destroy you while you were alive. Fear, not hope, held society together. Now let's step away from gods and kings and look at ordinary life. Because civilization is not built only by rulers, it is built by workers. Most Mesopotamians were farmers. They worked the land along rivers and canals. They grew wheat and barley. They raised animals. They depended entirely on irrigation. When canals failed, life collapsed. Cities were crowded. Houses were made of mud bricks, close together, few windows. Privacy was limited. Noise was constant. Markets were central to daily life. People traded grain, cloth, pottery, tools. Trade connected Mesopotamia to distant regions. This was an early global economy. Social structure was clear. At the top were kings and priests, below them nobles and officials, then merchants and artisans, then farmers and laborers. At the bottom, slaves. Movement between classes was rare. Your birth often decided your entire future. Education existed, but only for a few. Sons of elites attended schools where they learned writing and mathematics. These students became scribes. Scribes controlled records. Records controlled resources. Knowledge was power. Mesopotamia also transformed how humans understood the universe. They developed mathematics based on the number 60. This is why we still divide time into 60 seconds and 60 minutes. They observed the stars, tracked the movement of planets, created early calendars. Astronomy was practical. It helped plan agriculture, predict seasons, interpret divine signs. Medicine existed, but it mixed science and superstition. Doctors treated wounds, but illness was still seen as divine punishment. Healing required both treatment and prayer. As centuries passed, Mesopotamia evolved. Empires rose and fell, but the system remained familiar. Strong rulers, written laws, fear-based religion, hierarchical society. Civilization here was not peaceful, it was controlled. This is the critical difference between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. Indus cities suggest planning without visible kings, order without obvious violence. Mesopotamia shows us the opposite. Power was visible, authority was enforced, fear was institutional. Both were advanced, but they chose different paths. By the end of this period, Mesopotamia had created a complete model of organized civilization. Law, religion, economy, science, social hierarchy. This model would influence every civilization that followed. But it came at a cost. Constant war, resource exhaustion, environmental damage. And in the next part, we will see how this system finally began to break. how empires collapsed, how Mesopotamia lost power, and how its ideas survived long after its cities fell.